Silent.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Welcome back to the No Boring Stories podcast. I am Alex Street, and I am joined today by Jacob Kauffman. How are you, Jacob? How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Alex. Thanks so much for having me.
It is so good. We have had some amazing conversations already between you and me, talking all things all about life. I feel like we're already fast friends. So good. I got to ask you right off the bat, you've got this light behind you on the wall that says more love. Is this like, this is the simplest way for people to understand what I'm about? Like, why that? Why there?
Yeah, well, I mean, full disclosure, this is actually my girlfriend Carrie's office.
Yes.
So I totally can't take credit for the sign, but it is kind of perfect because I do have a book coming out in the spring of 2022 called Love Me. So it fits.
Okay, there we go. Love that. I didn't even plan for that pitch, but we got there. That's amazing. We want to talk about that. I assume that's going to contain your story in it, a good chunk of your story. Am I right? In that book? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a story of overcoming shame. It's my story of having gone through sexual abuse growing up as a young kid, as a young teenager, and the journey that I had to go through in order to heal, to be able to get to where I am today, to support entrepreneurs and world-class coaches in the way that I do.
Oh, baby, look at this. Okay, so you just packaged essentially your story. You just opened up all these loops that we want to know now. Like, whoa, tell me about that. Tell me about that. How do you transform from there to here? How do you get through that? Absolutely brilliant stuff. So that's just a little teaser as we get into this. But I want to start because I did ask you, tell me some of your favorite stories. And you gave me this specific scene. I don't think anybody's got as specific as you did. You said the Untouchables scene, so the scene in the Untouchables movie between Sean Connery and Kevin Costner in the church. And I was telling you earlier, I think I saw that movie once when I was like 12 years old.
Sure.
I don't know if that's too young to see that movie, but I don't remember this
Probably.
scene. So there was no rules in my house. It was the wild, wild west. And so tell me, what is it about this scene, whether you want to describe the scene or not, or just really what came out of that? Why does that specific moment stick with you?
It's a really good question. So for those of you who are listening and aren't familiar with the movie, The Untouchables is the story of Elliot Ness, who's a federal treasury officer back in the Roaring 20s, who is tasked to take down Al Capone. So Elliot Ness is played by Kevin Costner, and then Al Capone is played by Robert De Niro. It's truly an amazing, amazing movie. I think it was filmed in the early to mid 80s. And there's this pivotal moment early on in the movie where Sean Connery, who plays a beat cop who's part of Kevin Costner's task force assigned to take down Al Capone.
Just an incredible cast, first of all.
It's
just loaded. And
Andy Garcia, it's wonderful. And Sean Connery takes Kevin Costner aside and he says, "We need to go talk." And the scene cuts, and what you see next is them sitting in a church, and Sean Connery is fiddling with a rosary. And he asks him, "Do you really want to get Capone? Do you really want to get him?" And he says, Kevin Costner, that is, says, "Yes, of course I want to get Capone." And he goes, "So what are you prepared to do?" And Kevin Costner gives him, some, straight line police academy regurgitated, line about how he's willing to do anything within the law by any means necessary to get him.
Right.
And then Sean Connery just simply looks at him and goes, "And then what are you prepared to do?"
Except in a Sean Connery voice. "And then what are you prepared to do?"
Exactly. You did that great. Nailed it. And he says, "And then what are you prepared to do?" And it's a really pivotal moment for Kevin Costner, because up until that point, you get this sense that he wasn't willing to do absolutely everything necessary in order to get him. And Sean Connery goes on to say, if you open up the door on these people, Mr. Ness, they're not going to stop until one of you is dead. So if you want to get Capone, I'll tell you how to get him. One of his guys pulls a knife, you pull a gun. He puts one of yours in the hospital, you put one of his in the morgue. That's how you get Capone. That's the Chicago way. So what are you prepared to do? And I think this paints this perfect depiction of how people approach their dreams and their purpose and living their life. Because the vast majority of people say that they want to live an absolutely extraordinary life and to leave an incredible, lasting legacy. But very few people's actions actually line up with that statement, with that sentiment.
Yeah.
Right. Which is why they say that very few people are what everyone is what they do.
Let's do that again. You just skipped out when you said, and that's why they say.
And that's why they say that. Back up.
Yeah.
And that's why they say people are never what they say, but always what they do. It's because go ahead.
Well, I'm just reminded of a client that I've been working with, and they're going through this journey, really, that's been like kind of 18 months, at least as I've known them.
Sure.
To hire people and say, I'm ready to do this. I'm ready to change. I know what I need to do. Like, they're around midlife, 45 to 55, and saying, it's time for a change. And I know that I've got these gifts. And so they hired me as one of those coaches in their circle. Sure. And to really say, okay, how do I use my story going forward? And it was just recently in the last session that we realized all these choices that you've made, you're coming up against the most significant moment.
Sure.
And it's so difficult right now because it is the climax of the story. It is the messy middle. It is this moment where you feel like you've made every decision necessary, but it's still lacking. And you're still wondering, why is it so hard? And it's because, to Sean Connery's point, you haven't gone to the full extent.
Right.
You haven't fully committed to this.
100%. And the reason for that is primarily because that person's beliefs and their identity are not in alignment with the results that they say they are committed to creating.
Okay, that sounded like a lot of big words. So put that really practically. Their beliefs and
their identity
are not in alignment.
Right. With their desired outcome. Right. Because
so they've got this picture, but they're not living as if that picture is actually them yet.
Correct. There's a lack of congruence that's occurring because what we say we want is connected to our conscious mind, but what we actually do is connected to our subconscious mind. So if there's a gap between what you say you really, truly, deeply want and your actions, if you don't have it, or if you're not making significant progress towards it in the direction of it, that means that there's a lack of congruence or a lack of harmony between your subconscious beliefs and your conscious desires, which means you're fighting an uphill battle.
Yeah. Well, this is the fascinating part about storytelling for me is sometimes we tell stories often in the past, right? And we often, that's really what it is. It's like, this is what happened. And story it's about past events. This was my experience. And now I'm going to tell it to create a new future for me, for you, whatever that is. There's this beautiful give and take between the past and the future of what storytelling is. And sometimes it feels like we see a different version of the character in the future.
Right.
And so we're frustrated right now because we're not that.
Right.
And we sit here, and you probably face this with so many of your clients, and I know that I do. We sit here in this place of absolute like discomfort, frustration, because we're like, I'm not where I'm supposed to be. What's going wrong?
Right.
And yet the fact that you see a new version of that means that you like, there's almost a sense where it's like, no, you are on the right path because you do see that. Otherwise you're in a state of despair and you don't see a new future. You don't see a next chapter.
Yeah. I mean, I think that God doesn't call you to a game that you can't play.
Mm.
A lot of people have an incredible vision for what they want to accomplish, but they don't take action because of that lack of congruence, which is primarily driven by doubt and fear, without realizing that they wouldn't have the vision to begin with if they weren't capable of actually achieving it.
Oh boy. Okay. So here you sit as somebody who is, I assume, living in the vision that you once saw for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where we can dive deeper into my story, because
absolutely.
You know,
so wait, so tell me, so like, what is it that you're doing now? Like, how are you helping people? I assume, doing what we've just been talking about, finding congruence, finding alignment to actually put actions towards their goals. How are you showing up and helping people today? And what's the impact that you're seeing?
And I love that question. I think of myself as a legacy architect, and I support the top male entrepreneurs and coaches and world-class leaders in the online space. People who have a moonshot idea that far surpasses where they are in this moment, and they fully understand and recognize that who they are right now in this moment is not who they need to be in order to accomplish their long-term goal.
Yeah.
Brilliant. And so I fast track them to be able to ultimately accomplish that goal in, say, 1 year as opposed to 5.
Mm-hmm. So who I am is not who I need to be. And you will help me become who I need to be in order to see
right. Because
that,
if you were
that reality.
Right. If you were who you needed to be in order to accomplish your 10-year goal, you would have done it already.
Right.
Right. You would have done it already. So you need to become someone other than who you are right now. You need to become someone different if you ever hope to accomplish that. Right. There's a wonderful story actually in the Bible that talks about this. And I'm not a religious person, but it's a really brilliant line, and it's often glossed over in the Bible, where it talks about King David.
Mm-hmm.
If you're familiar with the story of David, he was just a commoner. Right? So the idea of a commoner becoming king back then was absolutely ludicrous. Right? It was ludicrous. It never happened. But early on, when David was really young, well before he ever became king of Israel, there's this beautiful little line that says, "And David perceived he was king." Meaning he had the vision for it long before it ever occurred. And all he needed to do at that point was become that person.
Yeah.
Insofar that he aligned his identity to becoming a king, and eventually he did.
That is fascinating because, I love the story of David, his ups and downs and everything that goes with it. And even looking at David and Goliath, he shows up as this, like, he's forgotten as one of 11 kids or whatever number it was. And he's left back at the farm while all the big, strong brothers go to war, and all those guys get looked over. And then David shows up and is like, "Hey guys, I've got a message for you. Who wants some snacks?" And they're like, you're the one to fight Goliath. And he's like, "Say what?" And how the story goes. So it's this almost accidental opportunity, but you're saying, this line of David perceived himself in this way is what allowed him to step into it.
Right, exactly. So many people see it as this accident, more or less, but it wasn't, because he like I said, he perceived himself as king. He had the vision for it long before it ever happened. And then
Yeah.
he aligned his attitude, his energy, and his actions toward that goal
Mm-hmm.
of becoming the king of Israel.
Yeah.
And eventually he did. There's stories about this
Yeah.
all over the place. Mike Tyson used to walk around the Bronx when he was 15 years old, telling everybody that he was going to be the next heavyweight champion of the world, or the youngest heavyweight champion of the world. And 6 years later, at 21 years old, he was.
Yeah. Yeah.
He spoke into it long before it ever occurred, right? And he just aligned his, like I mentioned, his attitude, his energy, and his actions to that goal.
So where does that idea of becoming someone, let's becoming king, becoming who you are now, that's a significant piece and a significant gift that you give to people. Where does that begin for you? Go way back, right? Go to childhood, go to teenage years, whatever it is. Where does this idea of like, you had a vision that either began then, or you realized I need to develop a vision because things aren't going as planned? This idea of becoming, essentially becoming someone you're not. Where does that begin for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's important to understand first and foremost that the vast majority of the world makes decisions from the space of their current circumstances, rather than their vision and what they're committed to, right? And so for me, it really started when I first invested in my personal development, right? Because I woke up one day, I was 29 years old. I was almost 30. I was serving tables at a restaurant in Chicago, living out these historical toxic behavior patterns that stemmed from the beliefs I created about myself as a result of the abuse that I experienced early on in my life.
Well, see this. So to interrupt, this is what's so interesting about this and you and your story, where I'm like, where does this idea begin? You're like, it begins at 29, and you just allude, you're like, which actually stems back to here. So I want to come back, because what I'm sensing here is that this 29 years old, when I began to invest in personal development, you're probably getting to something really good there that we're going to come back to. Now it's almost, we just tease that. We're like, come back to that, because I want to go back further then and say, yeah, okay, so what is that? And you can tell, as much as you want to go into this story, but it's those beliefs that needed to be reframed, were formed.
100%. Yeah. And it even goes back further than my abuse.
Of course.
It actually started when I was 2 years old, right? They say that the vast majority of your cognitive development happens between the ages of 2 and 7.
Yeah.
And this is when our beliefs and our identity are formed, which dictates how we perceive ourselves, how we perceive others, and how we ultimately relate to ourselves and others.
Yeah.
So
there's between 1 and 2, you're testing. Between 1 and 2, you're tasting.
Yep.
You're putting everything in your mouth. Between 2 and 7-ish, you're testing and you're pushing all the boundaries. And then between 7 and 10-ish, right? It's all, you're putting all that into concrete formation now and saying, oh, well, this is how the world works now. And so, in that space, here you are.
Right. And that's where your personality is being developed, which eventually leads to your character.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Which is Latin for set in stone.
So is it? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Character.
Who you truly are.
Whew.
Right. We'll come back to that later on down the road when I talk about, what I'm up to now and what I'm in creation of right now. And
fabulous.
why I'm doing that, because it has everything to do with character. But going back to when I was 2 years old, my earliest memory is of getting lost at a resort with my parents when I was 2. And it went on for quite a while. And while I was lost, all of the condominiums looked exactly the same. And as a 2-year-old, I forgot which one, my family was in. And I went up to a condominium where I thought they were. And I, knocked on the door as best a 2-year-old possibly could at that time. And someone opened the door and said, "Wrong place, kid." and shut the door on me. And so, of course, as a 2-year-old, I need to interpret and make meaning of this experience, right? Having the door closed on me, getting lost in the first place, right? Where are mom and dad? Are they even looking for me? Do they even care? And obviously, of course they do. My parents are incredible. But at 2 years old, you don't have the cognitive functioning to really be able to discern all of these things that as adults, we, empirically understand.
And then there's this jerk who shuts the door on a 2-year-old.
Correct.
It's clearly lost.
Right? And so, of course, as you can imagine, I interpreted that in a very self-defeating way, which caused me to make up this belief, which is the concept of the core wound that we support so many of our clients through, which is deeper than this, inherent story that I'm not good enough, because everybody has that story. But so many coaches think that is the root of the issue, which it's really not. That's what the ego uses to hide the root of the issue from us.
Yeah.
And so the belief that I made up in that moment at 2, at such a young age, was, I don't belong here. And so that belief got planted into my psyche. And so you can imagine, fast forward 10 years later, when I'm at Christian summer camp and I wake up and I'm informed by all of my friends in my life who were in the same cabin that I was in, that, hey, this guy just stuck his penis in your mouth. That belief became crystallized.
Yeah.
I interpreted that experience through the lens of what happened to me when I was 2. And in that moment, my ego got to say, see, this is why you don't belong here.
Yeah.
Right? Because here's not safe. Right?
Yeah.
I was taken advantage of. None of my friends had my back. And so my identity was built upon this belief. Right? And so
in that space, can you take me into that just for a second? Is it more about the community? Not, as you said, my friends didn't support me, so there's this community, or is it more about the act and the person? Yeah.
Well, I mean,
abuser.
just some context. Whenever something painful or traumatic happens to us, right? Like I mentioned, we need to make meaning of it.
Yeah.
But there's different facets to it. There's what happened before the event leading up to it. There's what actually happened. There is what was going around you when it happened. And then there's what took place after the fact. Right? Yeah. And so obviously what took place before it happened was this event when I was 2 years old, where I made up this belief around how I don't belong here or how I don't fit in.
Yeah.
Edit that out. Woo! Oh, man.
Did we get it all? You need some water?
Yeah, I'm going to get some water real quick. Hold on.
Mm-hmm. No worries.
Woo. That's my charger. Alrighty. Sorry about that, man.
If we really want to, explore this, then we would say, why is it that your throat just closed up when we started talking about this? That's
great.
Interesting.
I can't even tell you how many times I've shared this story.
Right.
But it always brings up something fresh each time I do it.
Uh-huh. So there's what was going on before the situation. There's then what happened.
Yeah. So right, what happened before the incident was this painful event when I was 2 years old where I created this belief. As you can imagine, it caused me to feel like the black sheep of the family and therefore act like the black sheep of the family. And then you had the abuse itself that occurred. You had what was going on around me, which was none of my friends sticking up for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had what happened after the fact, which is I was bullied for what happened. Because there were a lot of people there. Everyone knew about it. I grew up in a town of 1,000 people. So of course I ended up being bullied.
Right.
All of which, compounded together or compiled together, excuse me, formed this identity based on the belief that I don't belong here, or I don't fit in, or I'm not fully accepted for who I am. And so, as you can imagine, that belief became the basis for a lot of my decisions in life.
Yeah. Yeah. Because how does that, belong here? Is that a here kind of big picture, big, I don't belong here as existence, or did it or was it, in this very room, in this space, in every space that I enter into, I'm different. I don't belong.
Yeah, it was more so to do with, community, or my family or my group of friends. Not necessarily, I don't belong here as in earth or as, to exist. But as you can imagine, that caused me to, I graduated high school. I was the kid who got out of there, said he was going to get out of there, got out of there, recycled groups of friends for years, got fired from every corporate job I ever had because I would find a place of belonging.
Yeah.
And eventually I would sabotage it. Because
what does that look like?
What does that look like?
Like pick a moment, pick a job that you got fired from that you like, I sabotaged it. I didn't hand in the report on time.
Totally. I mean, for me, that looked like pushing the boundaries of what I was, the authority that I was given, or the decision-making power that I was given.
Yeah.
And so, I never, it's not like I ever stole from a company or anything like that. It was much more subtle and arguably much more sinister because it was never anything overtly conscious that I did to sabotage the situation. It was always kind of this subconscious decision that I made that ended up costing me my job, or that ended up costing me that group of friends. And in a lot of instances, it was really just a fear of intimacy that prevented me from going deep with that group of friends. And so I was kind of always on the outside looking in.
So would you get frustrated when you did get fired or lost or weren't invited somewhere? Would you get frustrated? Or were you like, yeah, well, of course, this is the way it is?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up. No, because at the time I was unaware of this belief.
Mm-hmm.
So I started to make up stories about myself, right? There must be something wrong with me.
Right.
I can't get it right. I can never get it right. And so it took the awareness of that belief to finally realize why I was doing what I was doing.
Yeah.
Pushing people away, keeping people at arm's length, because I was terrified of intimacy, because in my experience, intimacy meant opening myself up to be taken advantage of again.
It's so, isn't that so interesting? Because some people are listening to this and they're hearing this and they're in that space of, why does this keep happening to me? There's something wrong about me. I can't do this. I won't. And then it forms, as you said, this, might feel like a deep layer of, oh, it's this deep belief that I'm not good enough. You're like, right. You might get there and start to think that, but there's something below that. That's something before the before, right? There's something below that is actually creating that new story that you're living out. 100%. And for you, then you get to 29 years old, starting this self-development discovery, and it opens up all of this.
100%. Yeah. Like I mentioned, I woke up, I was 29 years old. I was serving tables in a restaurant,
Yeah.
and I was like, what am I doing with my life? Like, I'm almost 30 and I'm serving tables. I'm at a dead end job. And all that I knew at the time was that I needed to change, was that I personally needed to change because I was constantly changing my environment and my circumstances, new place, different job, et cetera, et cetera. But I was continuing to live out the same patterns, right? The same patterns that just had me continue to push people away, that had me fear intimacy. And so all I knew was that I needed to change. And that was this defining moment, right? And we come back to the story of, Sean Connery and Kevin Costner in the church,
Yes.
which
Yes.
is this defining moment, this point of no return moment where it is, you say you're committed, but what are you going to do now? And for me, that resulted in, me investing in my personal development. I literally uprooted my life. I moved out to LA to literally make it my life.
Yeah.
And I've been in the space ever since because I knew I needed to become a different person if I ultimately wanted to accomplish my vision. Who I was in that moment was not who I needed to be. And so I had to change.
What do you say? There's something that's coming up, honestly, for me about this idea of become a different person. And I'd love to explore it a little bit because there, the narrative really is, no, who you are is good enough. Like, you don't need to change. And yet also, like Bob Goff says, the advice written in your yearbook, never change, is the worst advice anybody could ever give you, because you have to change. Change
Totally.
is inevitable. Change is storytelling. Change is life.
Totally.
And so for those of us sitting here saying, like, you're telling me to become a different person, what do you mean? Like,
Correct.
come on. I'm good. I just need to make a little tweak here or there.
Right. Well, I mean, it just kind of depends on what you want to accomplish.
Right.
If you want extraordinary, right, that's going to require that extraordinary change, extraordinary commitment, extraordinary transformation.
Yeah.
So it just depends on what you really want to accomplish, right? Some people are okay with a little bit more money or a little bit more impact or a little bit more whatever, right?
Yeah.
3 vacations a year instead of 2, right?
Yeah,
Whatever that is.
Yeah. Totally different person.
Correct. But for those people listening to your podcast, I'm assuming that they want massive change, massive transformation, massive results, which is going to require massive shifts, massive investments, massive commitment.
Yeah.
So, I think Breaking Bad, if you're familiar with the TV show, actually paints this picture really well, and it just simply serves as another analogy to piggyback off of the example that we gave with the scene in the Untouchables, where it was like this point of no return experience. If you remember in the film, Walter White starts off as this loving family man, community member, high school teacher, very toe the line kind of upstanding middle-class guy. And he starts to sell methamphetamine to, be able to pay for his cancer treatment.
Yeah.
And he starts to dabble in it, right? And he goes down the path and he gets connected to some drug dealers and, drug suppliers and all these other things. And there's this moment where he gets in trouble. He's got his, business partner, Jesse, and this career criminal, who in the movies is named Saul. They get in trouble, and he looks at Walter White, who's still towing this line, and you can tell that there's still this inner conflict going on, this tension, this pull between Walter White, the family man, and Walter White, the criminal.
Yeah.
And so there's this tension, this conflict that's very, very evident, and it's a beautiful moment in film because I think it paints a perfect picture about what really needs to happen if you truly want to accomplish the extraordinary and fulfill your dreams and live up to your potential. Saul looks at him and he goes, Walter, no more half measures. And if you remember the scene, that is the pivotal moment where his identity firmly and completely shifts into Walter White, the criminal.
Yeah.
And if you remember in the show, he takes on the moniker of Heisenberg.
Heisenberg with the hat.
With the hat, Heisenberg. So I can't even remember who the creators of the film are, or of the TV show are, but it was just a brilliant depiction of what has to happen, what had to occur in order for that shift to take place. And I would argue that for each of us, there's this moment that we are given a choice. It's this blue pill, red pill moment where we're given an opportunity to pursue our dreams in a way, in an incredible way, that will absolutely result in a point of no return experience, a life before and a life after moment.
It's so fascinating. Of course, you talk Breaking Bad, man. I'm in for this. Like, I was there watching it live. We had a big party. I made fake crystal meth for the party. Like, that's like candy that we could eat. Like, that was for the finale. Did not do meth.
Right.
And in that show specifically, you see this counter story of Jesse, who is this deadbeat, and then he actually almost goes the opposite direction, kind of as they're going, and becomes this person who starts to try to at least get better, try to at least be somewhat of a citizen that he wasn't before. But all of this, in all storytelling, in your story, Jacob, in Walter White's story, in Elliot Ness's story, what we attach to and what we're trying to live out, what we're trying to do is answer what they call the dramatic question. And the dramatic question of all character building is, who am I going to be?
Yeah.
And we're always searching for that. When we're watching a movie, we're watching, whether it's Buzz and Woody or Elliot Ness, we're wondering, they're going through this situation. Who are they going to be at the end? Who are they going to choose to be?
Right.
It's Walter White. Who's he going to choose to be? Will he go back and go through the medical system, or will he continue to go down this thing that he's yearning for? Power actually is this thing that he loves more than anything. He doesn't want health. He wants power. And so we see who he's becoming. We may not like it, but holy crap, we're in for it because it's transformation. It's change. Right. And so for you, talking about becoming someone different, what you've been doing all this time is answering this question for yourself, Jacob. Who am I going to be? And the difference is between your life and so many others is you made a really clear distinction. No more half measures.
Correct. I wasn't interested in simply becoming a better person. I was interested in mastery.
Wow.
That requires a very, very specific mindset. It requires a very specific attitude, energy, and of course, daily actions. And most people are simply not willing to do those things in order to have what they say they really want to have.
Yeah. So what's conflict right now for you look like as this character who has developed and changed and is in this state of like, man, like I'm living in a state of mastery or learning it. What does conflict look like for you?
Honestly, boredom. Because with any skill, it's hard until it's not anymore. And it becomes super easy. Like, have you ever watched a sport and you're like, they make it look so easy? That's because it is. It is easy for them because they've achieved a level of mastery that they're able to execute upon their craft in a way that very few people actually can.
Right.
And this is why, I literally have the name for my process that I take all of my clients through, which is called the rapid transformation process.
Yeah.
We are able to transform people in a way, at a level, to a degree, and at a speed that very few people are able to accomplish by virtue of what we're able to do with them. And so for me, honestly, conflict looks like boredom. because it comes so easy to me at this point that I find myself needing to challenge myself in new and different ways. And not in like this masochistic kind of like
Yeah, right.
way, but the masculine grows through challenge. And so in order for me to continue to grow, because for me, growth is a lifestyle, I need to find something new and different to challenge myself with.
Yeah.
And when you achieve a certain level of mastery, that becomes difficult because it needs to be that much more extreme.
I just think that's so interesting to think of someone listening, and even myself, when you feel like, wow, yeah, this was like, look how far I've come. Mm-hmm. And if I'm ever at a place where I feel like, just like, I don't need to show up today. Yeah. like I used to, like, I can do this easily. I can show up for a session, or I can show up for a guest workshop. And yeah, I can prepare a little bit. If I get to that point, I'm doing something like you're saying, I'm not at the level that I need to be. I'm not pushing myself. That's the level of boredom, right? That's where you're like, if it's becoming too easy, it's because I'm not pushing myself. And so when it gets to that point, do I tweak the workshop? Do I need to change something? I need to edit this. Maybe it's not good enough anymore. Or not good enough. It's just, could I make it better? Can I push myself so that therefore I can push others?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what's really led me to do the work that I do today with men, because the vast majority of the men that I work with find themselves where I found myself, which is, having a very successful business, having a team to support me, being able to take an incredible amount of time off if I wanted to. And so I found myself kind of bored.
Yeah.
And I asked myself, what do I really need to do to take my life, my business to the next level? And I was like, well, I know that I need to challenge myself, and I need to force myself to get uncomfortable. Right? I need to change the conditions, or create conditions that force me to rise to the occasion.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's what I did. And that's what I do with, men now, because in my experience, they are super successful, and yet they know they're capable of so much more. They find themselves at a certain level of growth, but they know that so much more is available to them.
Something's missing.
Yeah, something's missing.
This is, and I say that because as I'm thinking of your story, as you've shared it with us here, this is what it seems like yours is a journey of essentially from missing to mastery. There's a sense of, from the beginning, you're someone who, from that very first moment when you were left by your family, and then now there's this abuse situation, and there's something different about me that everybody else has. And you go through that scenario, you go through 20 years then of career searching and trying things and always missing the mark in some way and feeling like I don't measure up. You lean into this self-development thing and start to learn and discover that you've actually had it within you the whole time. And now here you are helping other people who are feeling like something's missing to master their life and achieve success like never before.
Yeah, well, because my worldview, the basis for my worldview was around the identity of being someone who was abused.
Yeah.
So that became my identity. As you can imagine, it was an extreme assault on my self-worth. So I started to make decisions and take action from the space of that identity, right? Which ultimately caused me to be broke. At one point in time, I was homeless for 13 months, voluntarily homeless, but nonetheless, I couldn't afford my own apartment.
Yeah.
I could have borrowed money, sure, but I was in such scarcity and living from a place of so much fear, right, that my results suffered in every area of my life. And it wasn't until, like you mentioned, I became a different person that I started making decisions from the space of who I was committed to becoming, rather than who I am, that my life started to change dramatically.
How would you, as we wrap this up here and land the plane a little bit, then if that was your identity, what is it now? How would you identify yourself now?
The best high performance coach in the world.
It's different.
Yeah.
Right. So you look at these identifications that alone is a transformation. Obviously, from how you see yourself, like, let's just label this label to this label, significantly different.
Correct. And I realize that I am not there yet. Right. Like Tony Robbins has got something on me. Like, let's all be real. And it's the identity that I am taking on now, because your identity precedes your destiny.
Say that again.
It's the identity that I'm taking on now, because
we don't need to edit it. I'm just saying that was so good. I want to hear that again.
Yeah, because your identity precedes your destiny. So it's the identity that I am taking on now in order to eventually be that and become that.
Well, did Elliot Ness get him?
He did, on income tax evasion.
Nailed it.
Nailed it. Yeah.
Exactly how he wanted to.
Well, it's funny, but he was willing to do whatever it took, though, because if you remember towards the end of the movie, he didn't want to pursue that, right? He wanted to get him on something extreme, right? Bootlegging, murder, racketeering, blah, 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 right? And if he had allowed his ego to win, he never would have got him, because, if you know anything about Al Capone, he had, he paid his henchmen to do everything for him. So he never actually committed any crimes. He just, his henchmen committed all the crimes, right? So he was never going to get him in the way that egoically he wanted to, right? So that conversation with Sean Connery came full circle at the end of the movie, when he finally said, okay, let's pursue this. Let's go after, income tax evasion.
Right.
Because earlier in the movie, Sean Connery asked him, and then what are you prepared to do?
Yeah. There's our life question. There's our dramatic question. If we're trying to answer, who am I going to be? I think we've got this. Okay. So someone's going to answer that. Someone's going to sit in front of you and say, this is who I'm going to be. And you're going to say, okay, what are you going to do to get there? And we're going to describe it. We're going to say, I'm going to work hard. I'm going to set up these boundaries. I'm going to do these things. And you're going to sit there and say, and then what are you going to do? And that's when it gets real.
100%. Yeah. We always decide in advance. We decide in advance what the outcome is going to be, and then we work backwards from there.
Yeah.
And to your point, ask the question of, who do I need to be to get there?
Yeah. Well, it's brilliant. We have talked, obviously, we've shared some of the best stories being told out there today. Thank you for sharing your story, for bringing us all the way through that and seeing that incredible transformation to get you to the point where you are right now as the best high performance coach in the world. If somebody wants to get a hold of you and wants to start a conversation around really mastering their life and addressing what they feel like is missing, then what's the best way to contact you to get in touch with you and start a conversation?
Very good question. Because my Instagram recently was disabled. I know, exactly. But the best way to find me at this moment would be on Facebook. You can find me under Jake Kauffman, but would love to connect with you there. My website's jacobkauffman.com. So my full name, Kauffman. You can also sign up for my email newsletter there. But Facebook and my website are definitely the best places to find me at this moment.
So good, Jake. There we go. And by the time this comes out, Facebook is irrelevant. It's Meta.
Meta.
Come on. So look, we're all going through transformations, even the biggest company in the world. I am so grateful for your time. I'm grateful for your insight here and for all the conversation that we have, and for how you've no doubt dropped some bombs and helped people today to take a step towards that and really ask themselves those questions. What am I going to do? What am I really going to do now to reach this next level, to become someone different, to make the most impact? And I'm just so grateful. So good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Appreciate you, Alex.